I'd like to do a short introduction video to a series I'd like to do called WestWorld Wednesdays. And this is going to fit in my channel in that it's going to be one of a series of Petersonian reviews that I do. And if you're not familiar with Jordan Peterson, say you clicked on this because you like WestWorld, you might find this kind of review interesting because it focuses on the psychological aspects, the mythological aspects. And with WestWorld, you might not be familiar, and this is a detail I picked up on in my research, but one of the writers, Lisa Joy, she's definitely into poetry, and she's probably into William Blake, and that's someone I'm definitely into. If you're familiar with my channel, you know I'm a big William Blake fan. And she actually has quoted him, I think, twice in this latest season. So to get some insight from that perspective, to get some psychological insight, say from Jordan Peterson's perspective, that's what my series is going to be about. This video might take actually longer than I thought because I'd like to give you a sample of William Blake that I think fits the series. I'd like to also give you a sample of Iain McGilchrist, that's another lens I want to use to analyze the series, because it's very fitting, because he wrote a book, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. And if you're already familiar with the series, you know that the bicameral mind, or the bicameral brain, is a huge deal, and the creation of consciousness is a large part of the show. So to get this man's perspective and to give you, why would I trust this guy? Well, Iain McGilchrist is a psychiatrist, doctor, writer, and former Oxford literary scholar. See, McGilchrist he had a whole career as a literary scholar. He was at the pinnacle of his career. He had a chair at Oxford University, so you can't really get much more prominent than that. And he gave it all up, basically, to enter the field of psychiatry, and he became a doctor, midlife, sort of. And it's with his psychological insights, paired with his biological insights he gained as he became a doctor, that he wrote this masterful work, The Master and His Emissary. I would highly recommend it. And I'm going to read just a couple of passages, maybe one page of it, so you can get a feel for why that might be significant. But first, I want to just go over, to anyone who's not familiar, what WestWorld is. You can see it got a 9.1 out of 10 in IMDb, an 8.6 out of 10 in TV.com, and an 86% at Rotten Tomatoes, which is really good. 95% of people like this TV show, according to Google users. And the description is, WestWorld isn't your typical amusement park. Intended for rich vacationers, the futuristic park, which is looked after by robotic hosts, allows its visitors to live out their fantasies through artificial consciousness. No matter how illicit the fantasy may be, there are no consequences for the park's guests, allowing for any wish to be indulged. WestWorld, which is based on the 1973 Michael Crichton movie of the same name, features an all-star cast that includes Oscar winner Anthony Hopkins and Golden Globe winner Ed Harris. Yeah, both of those guys, they're excellent in the show, if you haven't seen it. Like I said, the writers and program creators, Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy, they're actually a married couple. And if you're not familiar with Jonathan, as I already touched on Lisa slightly, Jonathan, he has a famous brother, Christopher Nolan, and he's worked with him on a few films. You can, if you're just listening to this, you won't see that, but The Prestige, The Dark Knight Rises, so the two biggest Batman movies basically, and the science fiction film Interstellar. I believe Jonathan Nolan, yeah, here it is, Memento. He cut his teeth doing Memento, which is a film that's always recommended to me, and I've yet to watch it, but I do know it's apparently a mind-bending film. So this is one of the guys who's helping to write the show. It's a quality writer. Here's some pictures of various things in the show. That's nothing spoilery. Here's Anthony Hopkins in his office. He does an amazing job. Ed Harris plays an interesting character, one of the most interesting characters. I think he's often referred to as the Man in Black. That's the bicameral mind. All right, let me give you a sense of why William Blake might be important to WestWorld after you've just heard me say the little bit about what the park is about. Where any wish can be indulged. Here's some of William Blake in his epic poem Jerusalem. And there are a couple of names that you won't be familiar with that are mentioned, but just skip over that unfamiliarity and try to understand what you can understand from this. And if you've already seen the series, this may be interesting to you and you may already get the connections. If you have not, I will explore the connections in my week-to-week videos as I review each episode. Los took his globe of fire to search the interiors of Albion's bosom, in all the terrors of friendship, entering the caves of despair and death to search the tempters out, walking among Albion's rocks and precipices, caves of solitude and dark despair, and saw every minute particular of Albion degraded and murdered, but saw not by whom. They were hidden within, in the minute particulars of which they had possessed themselves, and there they take up the articulations of a man's soul, and laughing, throw it down into the frame, then knock it out upon the plank, and souls are baked in bricks to build the pyramids. Every universal form was become barren mountains of moral virtue, and every minute particular hardened into grains of sand, and all the tendernesses of the soul cast forth as filth and mire among the winding places of deep contemplation. I'm skipping ahead to another part. The poem itself, I think, is at least 100 pages or 200 pages long. They become like what they behold, yet immense in strength and power, in awful pomp and gold, and all the precious unhewn stones of Eden. They build a stupendous building on the plain of Salisbury, with chains of rocks, round London stone, of reasonings, of unhewn demonstrations, in labyrinthine arches, mighty Urizen the architect, through which the heavens might revolve and eternity be bound in their chain. Labor unparalleled, a wondrous rocky world of cruel destiny, rocks piled on rocks, reaching the stars, stretching from pole to pole. The building is natural religion, and its altars natural morality, a building of eternal death, whose proportions are eternal despair. So if you're familiar with the series, those haunting words might mean something to you in connection with the show. And if you'd like to know how something like that could be connected to a mere TV show, then stick around to my reviews, because what I think this show is, it's very close to a work of art. As far as a TV show can get, as close as a TV show can get to art, this is it. And what art, according to Blake, and this is why I think Lisa Joy is very important in this, and why Blake is important. A work of art is always the story of creation, fall, redemption, and a return to paradise. It's basically the biblical narrative, but retold in a poetic, metaphorical way. So to touch on the metaphorical way the story is told and my style of review, in the first episode, and this is just I'm not reviewing the first episode right here. I'm just giving you a taste for how I might review it come next week. I have about 60% of my notes taken already. But in the first episode, there is a side conversation going on in a train car. You're meant to hear it, but it's definitely something that's happening to a non-main character. And it's just a couple of guys talking about their previous trips to the theme park. And so one man says to his friend, first time I played it, White Hat. Family was here. We went fishing and gold hunt in the mountains. Last time, came alone, went straight evil. best 2 weeks of my life. So I think what you have here, you can interpret this in a literal way or a metaphorical way, but given the quality of the writers and their penchant for and love of poetry, I think the gold hunt is there for a purpose. It's not just a literal gold hunt that you might find in a WestWorld kind of theme park. It is metaphorical gold that's in the mountains. And if you finished season 2, that might make a lot more sense to you. Literally, you're participating in these little stories, these little narratives that the writers of the theme park set up for you. But metaphorically, you are the story. You become the story. And this, if you're familiar with my other videos in my channel, this goes back to something I'm working on through Northrop Frye and William Blake. And it's that science does not prove metaphor false in an ideal sense. It proves the accidental in metaphor false. And I explain that in other videos. I don't want to get into it exactly right here and now. But like I said, if you're familiar with that, then this is what's happening in the show, is that you have this sequence of science proving metaphor accidental, leaving the ideal alone. That's the biblical narrative for us to capture. That's the metaphorical gold. And that metaphor that's left then doubles back and proves that science is accidental. And that we, consciousness, this is the big part of the show, humanity or conscious beings, can be created in another way. And this is shifting science and biblical narratives all mushed up together. And one of the main characters, if you're familiar with the show, Anthony Hopkins plays a character named Ford. He is definitely a representation of God in this series. And of course, only Anthony Hopkins is one of the few people who can play God. So some of the topics that I'd like to cover and that you will see covered in the show if you watch it, regardless if you watch my reviews or not, you're going to see discussions about free will, the nature of an embodied self, the nature of consciousness, the nature of God, what it's like to be a creator of conscious beings, how narrative goes from being something in the background to being something very much in the foreground to actually being itself, which is a little bit hard to hear given the English language, but I think it's definitely worth checking out. So here is the last thing I'm going to do is just give you a sample of another angle I'm coming at this review from, and it's the angle of Iain McGilchrist, who I already mentioned earlier. And if you're already a fan of the series, you might find this very illuminating. And if you're not familiar with the series, this might give you something interesting to look forward to, because these are the types of readings I'm going to get into in my reviews as they come up in each episode. Human imitation is not slavish. It is not a mechanical process, dead, perfect, finished, but one that introduces variety and uniqueness to the, quote, copy, which above all remains alive, since it becomes instantiated in the context of a different, unique human individual. Imitation is imaginatively entering into the world of the one that is imitated, as anyone who has tried the exercise of imitating an author's style will know. That is perhaps what we mean by style, not a fashion, just something superficial, taken up or put off, as it sounds like a garment, but an essence. Even to attend to something so closely that one can capture its essence is not to copy slavishly. To Ruskin, it was one of the hardest as well as one of the greatest human achievements truly to see so as to copy and capture the life of and a single leaf, something the greatest artist had managed only once or twice in a lifetime. By the way, not to interrupt this beautiful passage, but this also comes up in a video I'm doing regarding Nietzsche on truth and lies, and William Blake and so forth. It's about metaphor and epistemology. It's going to be really interesting. If you can paint one leaf, you can paint the world. Imitating nature may be like imitating another person's style. One enters into the life. Equally, that life enters into the imitator. In imitation, one takes up something of another person, but not in an inert, lifeless, mechanical sense, rather in the sense of its being, whereby it is taken into ourselves and transformed. Imitation gives rise, paradoxically as it may seem, to individuality. That is precisely because the process is not mechanical reproduction, but an imaginative inhabiting of the other, which is always different because it is intersubjective betweenness. The process of mimesis is one of intention, aspiration, attraction, and empathy, drawing heavily on the right hemisphere, whereas copying is the following of disembodied procedures and algorithms, and is left hemisphere based. The distinction is similar to that sometimes claimed between metaphor on the one hand and simile on the other. Simile has no interiority. Thus, writing of the difference between the earliest humans and Homo sapiens, Stephen Mithin writes, "We might characterize early humans as having a capacity for simile. They could be like an animal, but not for metaphor. They could not become an animal." What he is getting at here is empathic identification. So that's a small sample of how I might do this weekly series of reviews. The WestWorld Wednesdays are not going to be my top priority, so there may be Wednesdays where I don't have it all complete. My top priorities are my Fearful Symmetry Fridays and Meaning, Maps of Meaning Mondays. But I think this would be kind of fun to do a Petersonian review, throw in some McGilchrist, throw in some William Blake, and see how unique of a review of WestWorld we can get. Anyway, I hope you're interested in that kind of thing. If you are, like and subscribe. Thank you.